They called her a star, Hollywood royalty, a woman of unmatched beauty, prestige, and global fame. But even in the spotlight, surrounded by the glitz of red carpets and the applause of millions, Angelina Jolie was quietly drowning, not in wealth or success, but in questions, in pain, in a haunting void that no award could ever fill. And then, something happened. Not on a film set, not at a press conference, but in a dusty refugee camp, under a broken tent. While holding the trembling hand of a forgotten child, she heard something. A verse, a voice, a whisper of truth. That moment would change everything, because what she heard wasn't just a sound. It was the Qur'an. And it didn't just speak to her. It shook her soul. There are stories the world forgets, and there are stories that refuse to be forgotten. This is one of them. Angelina Jolie wasn't always searching. She had everything the world says you should want. Fame, beauty, influence. But behind her commanding presence was a woman wrestling with unseen wars. A woman who had seen the inside of psychiatric hospitals, who had felt the cold steel of a knife against her own skin, trying to make sense of a world that never gave her peace. She played roles on screen, but inside, she didn't know who she was. And in her private moments, she whispered the same question millions do. Why am I here? Then came the war zones. Not the ones in her films, but the ones in the real world. Jolie became a humanitarian, but she didn't do it for cameras or applause. Something in her broke when she saw real pain, not scripted pain. Real mothers crying over lifeless children, real fathers burying pieces of their hearts. And amidst this horror, she began to feel small, not in weakness, but in realization. The realization that she knew nothing about the world, nothing about God, nothing about the purpose of suffering. In 2001, Angelina was appointed a UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador. It was meant to be symbolic, a title. But for her, it became an awakening. While others were posing for photographs, Jolie was sitting cross-legged with refugees in Pakistan, listening. One afternoon, she heard a young woman recite something soft under her breath. The melody was haunting, the words foreign, but they held weight. Jolie asked her what it was. "It's the Qur'an," the woman said. "It comforts me." Jolie didn't say anything, but something stirred inside her. Later that night, under a starless sky, Angelina asked her translator to read her what the woman was reciting. It was from Surah al-Baqarah. "And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits. But give good tidings to the patient." Jolie sat silently. Her eyes welled up, not because she understood everything, but because something finally made sense. Pain was not random. Suffering was not meaningless. It was a test, a journey, a road back to God. That night, Jolie requested a Qur'an in English. For months, she kept it close. Not for religion, not for conversion, but for understanding. She read it like she'd read no other book. Not as a script, but as a lifeline. Do not despair. And the more she read, the more she began to see a version of herself that Hollywood never gave her space to find. A version of herself that was not defined by roles or directors or awards, but by silence, reflection, surrender. She found herself drawn to verses that spoke of justice, compassion, and humility. She underlined passages about the orphan, the widow, the refuge. These weren't abstract concepts to her. They were the people she'd met, the lives she'd held. The Qur'an didn't romanticize suffering. It dignified it. It honored it. And more than that, it made her feel seen. One day, while visiting a Syrian refugee family in Jordan, A child asked her why she was always helping Muslims. Jolie knelt down and smiled. "Because you remind me of who I wish I could be." The child's father looked at her, surprised, and asked if she was Muslim. Jolie paused. "Not yet," she said. That "not yet" wasn't a performance. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a confession. A woman who had walked through the world's darkest corners, now beginning to see light. The media never told this story. They saw the scarf on her head as a gesture of respect, not a sign of spiritual searching. They filmed her visits, but missed her tears. They photographed her holding the Qur'an, but never asked why. Because the world has a way of silencing truth when it threatens the narrative. But inside her heart, something undeniable was happening. She spoke privately about the discipline of Muslims, how 5 prayers a day kept them grounded, how the fasting in Ramadan reminded them of gratitude, how charity wasn't just a suggestion but a pillar. These weren't just rituals, they were reflections of something bigger, of surrender, of unity, of purpose. Jolie began changing, slowly, quietly. She distanced herself from certain roles, refused scripts that glorified violence or sexual exploitation. She started adopting a modest wardrobe, not for attention, but for intention. She donated millions to Muslim communities without a press release. She sat in masjids during calls to prayer, even if she didn't know all the words. One scholar she met in Turkey told her, "Angelina, the Qur'an isn't a book you read. It's a book that reads you." She smiled. That's exactly how it feels. She often reflected on Surah Ash-Shah. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. It became her anchor, not because life became easier, but because she became stronger. The woman who once carved pain into her own body was now finding healing in verses that spoke directly to her heart. In an interview that was never aired, Jolie admitted, "When I hear the Qur'an, I feel like someone is finally telling me the truth. Not sugar-coated, not censored, just the truth. And sometimes it hurts, but it also frees me." She wasn't claiming perfection. She wasn't making a declaration, but she was walking towards something, towards peace, towards truth, towards God. She often sat under the sky at night, Qur'an in hand, and whispered prayers she didn't know how to say. "God, guide me," she'd say. "Help me be better." And even though she didn't grow up in a mosque, didn't speak Arabic, and didn't memorize chapters, she was heard. Because guidance is not about geography, it's about sincerity. The Qur'an began shifting how she raised her children. She taught them about empathy, about justice, about standing with the oppressed, not from a script, but from her soul. She read them stories of the prophets, of Moses, of Maryam, of Yusuf. They weren't fairy tales, they were blueprints. She once told a close friend, "People think I'm saving others, but the truth is Islam is saving me." Her life became quieter, but richer. Less Hollywood, more humanity. She still made films, but the films had purpose. She still walked red carpets, but she no longer chased their approval. The applause meant little, because now she knew what mattered. She once said, "I used to think religion was about control, but now I see it's about liberation. The Qur'an didn't trap me, it set me free. This journey isn't over. It may never be broadcast. It may never trend, but in the quiet corners of her life, a woman the world thinks it knows is slowly transforming, not for headlines, but for her soul. In a world full of noise, she found silence. In a world of fiction, she found truth. In a world that told her she was a goddess, She found peace in surrendering to the one true God. And that is the story that will never win an Oscar, but it will win something far greater. A soul. I storytelling style kisi blog yaya sajs nahi hoti jan. Conclusion. Lik kar end kia jata hai. Is style mean emotional impact natural osiata hai. Last sentence be story ka kisa hota hai. Alagsi ending line nahi hoti.